All right, so we'll keep going with adding our materials since we have a really good base now for a very matte material, for a reflective material, for a like slightly illustrated material. We can just go ahead and like make copies of these and just tweak the colors and then apply it to whatever object that we see fit. So the next object that I'll want to add a material to will be the grass, because I think that's going to do a lot to our scene to add in another type of color in there. And I kind of want it to be this very soft and slightly illustrated material. So I'll go ahead and duplicate our mouth material, since that's where we have this material blender and color constant thingy going on. So I'll just control drag that, rename that to grass. And since we have this original grass object, this little thing, we can just add the material to that sphere, and that will then apply to every single grass instance that we have created. So I'll just go ahead and drag and drop it there, like that. Obviously, I don't want it to be this brown dead grass. I want it to be very vibrant and poppy. So I'll just go ahead and drag it to something that's like a bit green, cyanish. It's a very vibrant type of green I'm seeing. I feel like it's a bit too illustrative. As you can tell now, when we kind of slide this along, we see what this is doing. I do want to get some details going on in there, so maybe somewhere around, let's try maybe 50% for now, blending. And I'll just activate render region by hitting shift and dragging here. So I kind of want these shapes to blend together a bit better than they are right now. Now, obviously we could throw everything into a volume measure like we've done before, but I still want to really retain the shape of the designs that we have just made. And if we just look at like the creases and the intersections that we're getting here, an easy way to do this within the material is actually to add a thing called a round corner node. And that will basically do what it sounds like. It will kind of smooth out and round corners and intersections where your material is applied. So we can come down to our shader graph. I'll hit Shift C and I'll type in round corners and I'll hit enter. And if I just take our round corners node and drag it to our Redshift material and then find the bump input. So overall and then bump input. So I'll just plug it in there. And now if we kind of start to tweak the radius of this, we can kind of see what this is doing to our material. So if I just zoom in here, and I might want to make sure that my scaling is set to 100% now, just so we can see the detailing work that we are doing. So now when I have this at 1, you can kind of see that we're getting this like fake smoothing of our creases here. And if I set this to 0, you can really see the difference. So now it's just a harsh intersection. If I set this to 2 or 1, you're getting this very, very smooth intersection going on here. So I just actually set it to maybe 1.5 will work in my case. This might be different to you, but 1.5 feels good enough for me, I think. Like that. Great. And we'll keep moving on with our environment materials. So I'll go ahead and do the rocks, and I'll do the same thing here. I'll just duplicate the mouth material, and I'll rename this rocks. And I'll go ahead and drag and drop this at our cloner. And I'll go ahead and change our color constant here. Set it to a much brighter, warm orangish color. So just up the brightness quite a bit and down the saturation, I think. So it's just kind of a bit brighter than our background. Maybe something like this. Might not want to blend this as much. I want to kind of down the blending a bit, because it kind of feels a bit too illustrative. Yeah, I'm kind of liking the look of that. And we'll keep going with these bottom parts. I think we can actually just use the same material for our hair as for the boots. It's just nice to have things within the same color palette, and I like the surface that we have with the hair, so I think it will do really well on our boots as well. So I just take my hair material, I'll make sure that we find our boot null here, just drag and drop the hair material there, and I can just shift drag to activate our region render. That's looking great, but I want some different material for our laces here. And I think we can use the skin material for that. So I'll just go ahead and drag and drop our skin material on there. Yeah, that's looking really, really good. And with that, I think we can move on with our hands, or the gloves, I'd say. Now I want to use the same kind of color and material for our gloves as for the boots. but I do want to add some other effects to it. So I'll go ahead and duplicate our hair material, and I'll call this gloves. And I'll go ahead and make sure that I find the correct objects for that material. So I'll just hop out in our perspective view, and I'll go through and kind of just select everything that is affected by that. So every single finger. Oh, we might not even see. Oh yeah, we do some of that. Nice. All right. So with all those selected, just hit right click and then apply, like that. Now, what I want to do with the gloves here is the same thing that I did with the grass. So I want, for example, you see it very clearly here. I kind of want this to just be a continuation of the glove. I don't want it to feel like we've just put the capsule and just shoved it into her knuckles. I want it to feel like the glove is a bit smoother than that. So obviously we can just use the round corners node again. So I'll just search for that, hit enter, and then plug it into our overall bump like that. And then we can go ahead and play with the radius again. If I set it to 1, you can already see some stuff kind of going on here. We're getting rid of that intersection here. Now we are also getting, blending between her fingers like this. That is kind of the downside with this, is that you can't really select where this should affect the material and where it shouldn't. But that's just one of the things that we'll kind of have to deal with when we're using the round corners node like this. As I said previously, we really want to retain the super graphic and geometric shapes. So I'd rather use some material tricks to kind of smooth out the intersections rather than having to remodel everything just to keep, an intersection smooth. So it's a bit of a give and take game, but I feel like this works really well. And we can actually do the bandages as well. So I'll just move our region over here. I can actually take our ground material and duplicate that because I don't want any effects on this. I just want a plain material with a color. So I'll just rename this bandages like that. And we'll go ahead and select the cloners where our bandages is at and right click and apply like that. And I kind of want it to be a lot brighter than the background. So I'll just go ahead and brighten this a bit. So something like this. So it's almost white, but not really. So something like that. I'm also seeing that parts of the bandage is getting clipped into her legs here. So we can just go ahead and maybe I'll just switch from garage shading now to quick shading so that lighting doesn't affect our viewfinder. And I will probably just go ahead and select our tube here, just activate the scale tool and just scale it up just slightly like that. And like with the laces that we did, I think we also can apply the skin material to the strings here, just so we have this common theme going through. So I'll just select these 3 things, right click, apply, like that. Great, starting to look really, really beautiful. Maybe the same thing for the zipper here as well. So I just make sure that I select only the zipper and not the entire subdivision surface, just like that, right click, apply, perfect. I just go ahead and fold down all of these things now because our object panel is getting really messy. So with that in place, I think we can move on with our sword guard and handle, I think. So I think I want to lean into some more real life textures with the sword guard and the blade and stuff. So I think for these pieces, it would be nice to kind of get some irregularities in and like get some bump maps in so we can kind of feel like this would be some kind of like painted plastic material up close. So instead of just explaining what we're going to do, let's just jump in and do it. So like before, we can start out using one of our previous materials. So I'll just go ahead and duplicate this bandages material. I'll just rename this guard and we'll go ahead and apply this to the pieces where the material will be applied. So I'll just drag and drop it onto the guard null here like that. And the first thing that we can do is just change the color immediately. I'm kind of seeing that we're doing some form of like painted brown color, so something very vibrant but still dark-ish. So something like this maybe. We can tweak the colors better later on once we're a bit further along. And since we actually do have some bandages along the handle of our sword, we can actually just go ahead and apply the original bandages material here. Like that. Perfect. And the first thing that we can do with this material is actually apply a bump map. And a bump map is basically just a form of texture or image that simulates irregularities in the surface. So for example, if we add a noise as a bump map, the bump map will use the black and whites of the image to drive surface imperfections basically. So we can go ahead and isolate our render region just on top of our guard. And I'll just collapse this so we see more of our character. So the first thing that we can do is actually create a noise here within our shader graph. So I'll just hit Shift-C within here, type in Maxon noise, like that. And just to see what we're doing, I usually like to plug in whatever new kind of image or effect you're applying to our output surface, just so we can see how it looks before we actually plug it into any bump map or, diffuse or anything like that. So now we can kind of see what this is looking like. And I'll just kind of scroll down here and change the type of noise to something else, like a Luca, for example, that usually gives off a very contrasty, crunchy kind of result. And I want to have it fairly scaled down as well, so it's not as big. Just looking at this, we can actually go ahead and apply this to our material as a bump map, just so you can see what this is doing. So I'll just hit Shift-C, type in bump map. I'll take our out color of the Maxon noise and plug it into the texture input of our bump map, like that. And then I'll plug the bump map into our Redshift material node, head into overall, and then bump input. And we'll plug our material into our output surface, just so we see what this is doing. So obviously you can see that you're getting a very extreme kind of effect here. So we can go ahead and lower the height of our bump map, which is basically the strength. So I can just drag this down to maybe like 0.3, 0.5, something like that. Let's do it at 0.5. And we obviously don't want it to be this big, because this kind of feels more like paper to me now. I kind of want some very, very fine detail. So the good thing with the noise is that it's automatically seamless, so you can scale it down or scale it up how much you want. But I'll just scroll down here to input and to overall scale. And here we can kind of drag this down and see what this is doing to the look of everything. So if I set it to like 0.1, like really, really small, and I'll actually activate bucket rendering now, just so you can see like the final look of it instead of letting it progressively render all the time. And I reckon this kind of bump is still a bit too big, so I'll just reduce it even further. So maybe like 0.33, something like that. And that's starting to get somewhere. I just want some super, super fine detail, just something to kind of give it a bit more of a wear and tear look. I think that kind of scale is good. I think we can reduce the strength of it, so I'll just set it to 0.25 instead, I think. I reckon that's feeling really good. Now, something that I like to do when it comes to materials that I want to feel like they've been touched by or that they've actually been used and I kind of have been affected by, the passage of time or whatever, I kind of like to add some form of like dusting along the edges of the surfaces. And a really good way to do that is by adding a node called the curvature. So I'll go ahead and add that node just so you can see what that does. So I'll hit Shift-C here, type in curvature, and we'll go ahead and add this straight into our output just so you can see what this does. And I'll deactivate bucket rendering here. And now you can kind of see what this is doing. It's kind of doing a calculation on the normals of your geometry. Currently it's set to give this like white gradient along the edges of your model, which is what I want. So I won't do any corrections there. I might actually go into general here and just change the radius so it kind of expands a bit further. And I'll hop back into remap here. And I don't want these like grayish tones. I kind of want them to be either black or white. So if I just take this input range here and increase the min, you can kind of see how it clamps back the whites a bit. So you don't have these grayish washed out tones here. But then it kind of reduces the white parts as well. So I want to increase the input max quite a bit. So it kind of clamps this up quite a lot. Then we can come back to the general and increase the radius, see what this does. Maybe 1.5 is good. Now, obviously, we want this to be applied on top of our current color, but if we were to just apply this to our diffuse channel, we would just have this black and white curvature effect. So a way to do that is just to add a color layer, which is what it sounds like. You're able to add different layers of colors and stuff and blend them in between each other. It kind of reminds you of how layer works in Photoshop. So we can go ahead and add that. I'll just take these and just drag them down just so they're not in the way. I'll hit Shift C, type in layer, which brings up the color layer. I'll go ahead and add that. And obviously we want our diffuse color to come with our color layer because the default here is black. So I'll just copy the hexadecimal. I'll make sure that my hexadecimal field is available. I'll select that, Control C, and then I'll paste it into our, oh, not there, actually, the base layer. So I'll just paste in the hexadecimal value there. And I can go ahead and plug the color layer now into the output surface. And that will be pitch black. And that is because the layer 1 here is enabled. So if I disable this, you'll see that the black disappears and our brown color comes back. So we're going to take this curvature node and plug it into the layer 1 mask so that the white parts of our curvature will then mask out any color that we want to be applying in our layer color node. So I'll just take this curvature node and drag it and connect it to layer 1 mask. And once that's connected, nothing will happen because our layer 1 is disabled. So I'll go ahead and enable that again. And now you can see that since this is black, we are masking in some black parts from this layer 1. And I actually want to make these white because I kind of want it to feel like it's very dusty and stuff. And this is kind of giving more like the result that I'm looking for. And I'll obviously want this to be connected to our Redshift material diffuse. So I'll take this Redshift color layer and plug it into our diffuse color. And then I will also plug in our Redshift material into our output surface like that. And now we can kind of see what sort of effect we're trying to get. It's almost as if I'm trying to replicate, the like brushed Warhammer look where you kind of add some wear and tear by just like lightly brushing a brush up against the surface. So that's sort of the effect that I'm trying to mimic. And you can go ahead and like tweak the remapping of this and stuff to whatever result you want. You might not want to have it as strong as we had at first, so maybe something like this works best. Maybe increase the radius, try and see what that does. That actually helps a lot. It doesn't feel as concentrated, it feels more like gently brushed on there. So I set the radius to 2 and then I set the input range to 1 instead, so I think that's looking great. Now I kind of want to add some more surface imperfections, like, sources of fingerprints and stuff, as if someone has been like touching this and like flipping it around and stuff. I'll actually go ahead and deactivate my IPR for now, just so we're not rendering in unnecessarily. So naturally you can add a like fingerprint texture to this. That's what I'll be using. And obviously, like with the HDRIs, we are kind of trying to build this course on free resources, which might not be the best looking ones, but I found one that works really well, and it's the same kind of thing. If you feel like you're using their resources for actual profit, working for clients, then you might want to consider donating to them. But I found a really good tileable, good fingerprint texture that we can use. So it's from a site called CG Bookcase, and they have it available in 3K, which is great. And here you can kind of see how it looks tiled and stuff, which is really good. It's looking better than that in high res. But I'll download it at 3K like this. So once you save that down, we can just hop back into Cinema and we'll go ahead and add a texture node, which is our first one. So I'll hit Shift C, type for texture like that. And like with our HDRI, we'll want to link an image here. So I'll just hit the folder here and we can go ahead and link this on our own. Same thing here. I'll want this stored locally in my texture folder. Like that. Great. So let's go ahead and plug this into our output just so we can see how this looks on its own. So I'll just plug this in. We'll start our IPR. You can obviously tell, I'll just regen this out again. You can obviously tell that the mapping and the stretching and stuff going on our different pieces of this guard is not really giving a result that we want. And this is due to the way texturing works in 3D. And to kind of get an even distribution on this scale of the textures, you'll either have to do some tricks in the material or you'll have to UV each and every one of these objects. Now, that might be necessary if you're working within gaming or anything that needs for non-locked texture parameters or something. But in our case, we can kind of cheat our way around this. And there is a really good way of doing this using a triplanar node in Redshift. And I'll just create that node just so you can see what this is doing. So I'll just hit Shift C, search for triplanar. We'll enter that in and I'll plug that straight into our output surface just so we can see what this does. So this basically creates a cube projecting around the guard of the sword. And right now it's just projecting the same image on each axis, which is a red color. But if I turn this off, then you can kind of see what sort of effect this is doing. So what's so good about this is that we can procedurally just project an image on the same size regardless of how big the object is in Cinema. So you can kind of get the same scaling on each object, which is exactly what we want. And another good thing is that you can also kind of blend the color between each other. So if I change this blade amount, you can see how it kind of blends between the colors here. And that's what it's going to do with our images as well, which is what we want, because then you don't get any hard edges or any tiling going on, because that's kind of what you want to avoid when you're UV mapping. So with this plugged in, I'll go ahead and check this one in again. So it's projecting the same image on every axis. We'll take our texture that we just created, plug this into texture image X in our triplanar. And now you can see what this does. Now we have a even projection and mapping across each object without having to do any UV mapping. So that's really good. And if you come into the texture node here, we can just scroll down here. And here you can kind of play around with the scaling. So for example, if you want the fingerprints to be a bit smaller, you can change this to 2 instead of 1. This is kind of the number of times you will multiply the images next to each other. So you're basically tiling them more times by setting this to a higher number. I want to do the opposite. I want to scale them up. So I'll set this to maybe 0.5. That might be a bit too big. So I'll set it to 0.75. Like that. And then you can just kind of play around with the offsetting here until you find I want a really good spot where we get a lot of fingerprints, but also a lot of contrast in the same placement. So I think I had a few nice ones somewhere around here. Yeah, I think that's looking good. So what we can do then is I'll just move this off a bit here. We can take the triplanar node and plug this into our layer color 2 channel. And we just go ahead and plug our redshift material into our surface again. And we'll come into the color layer, scroll down and enable layer 2, which will then just show a black and white image of our fingerprints. But if we change this from blend mode normal to screen, that will disregard all the black parts of the image and just show the bright parts like that. Perfect. And it's a bit too much. It's getting bright white, so I'll just tone this down a bit. Something along that, maybe. I think we can also try and just kind of increase the contrast of this fingerprints image a bit, just so we can kind of crush some of the gray parts out, but keep some of the brighter ones. So instead of taking our texture and throwing it into Photoshop and color correcting it, we can just do that in Cinema. So if I just create a color correct node like that. This is pretty big, so I'll just move these things out, and we'll connect our triplanar node to the color correct node, and then we'll plug the color correct node into the layer 2 color like that, and then we can kind of see if we can increase some contrast in here like this. So we're kind of eliminating some of the gray parts but highlighting some of the white ones like that. I think we're getting some nice results here. I'll go ahead and do the buckets rendering here just so we can see the final result of this. Maybe we can reduce the masking here on our layer 2. So I'll reduce this maybe 0.3. Yeah, I reckon that's looking really nice. This is also, of course, completely up to you. If you have some other textures that you want to throw in, feel free. Maybe you can even take the fingerprints and plug it into the bump as if it's kind of been molded by someone, as if it's this kind of clay material. But I think we'll leave it at this for this lesson. And in the next one, we'll get into adding some kind of power stone for our sword, doing a sword blade material and some more stuff. So yeah, I'll see you over there.